The lobby of Pierce Global Holdings gleamed like a cathedral of ambition. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath a chandelier worth more than most people's homes. The air was cool, perfumed with power and polished by money. Every morning, executives in tailored suits glided across the tiles as if they owned the world. Every morning, Ravi mopped behind them, quiet, invisible, and underestimated. He was early that day, like always. The sun had barely touched the skyline of Manhattan, but Ravi had already filled his mop bucket, tied his faded uniform, and begun polishing the grand floor that mirrored his own reflection. His hands were rough, his eyes kind but distant. There was a calm precision in his movements, a rhythm that came from someone who once worked with words instead of wax. The elevator chimed. Landon Pierce, billionaire CEO of the empire, entered with his usual entourage of assistants and investors. Tall, sharply dressed, and perpetually irritated, he looked like a man allergic to imperfection. His polished shoes clicked in sync with his arrogance. "Move that thing, will you?" Landon barked, barely glancing at Ravi. Ravi silently pulled the mop aside. "Good morning, sir," he said softly. Landon stopped, turning just enough to glance at him, like one might look at a bug that somehow learned to talk. "Good morning," he repeated mockingly. "Do you even know what that means here? This is not your little corner store, my friend. This is Pierce Global Holdings. We build nations here." One of the executives snickered. Another whispered, "He probably can't even spell nation." Ravi simply smiled and continued mopping. The subtle glint in his eye irritated Landon even more. "You think that's funny?" Landon demanded. "No, sir," Ravi replied, still calm. "Just thinking how clean floors make even billionaires walk safely. My job, small as it is, serves yours." The hall went silent for a moment. A few assistants looked away to hide their smirks. Landon's jaw
tightened. He wasn't used to being answered, especially not by someone in a janitor's uniform. "Is that right?" Landon said, stepping closer. His polished shoes stopped inches from Ravi's bucket. "You think you're serving me?" "I serve the place, sir," Ravi said. "And the people who use it." Landon's assistant, Victor, chuckled. "He sounds like one of those motivational speakers. Maybe he's got a philosophy degree tucked in his mop." Everyone laughed. Ravi didn't flinch. Landon smirked and pulled a file from his briefcase. "You want to be useful, philosopher? Here." He held out a set of documents printed in thick, foreign text. "Translate this for me. It came from one of our new partners in Asia. You get this right by morning, maybe I'll let you clean the conference room instead of the toilets." The group laughed louder. One of them muttered, "He probably thinks translate means move it from one desk to another." Ravi looked at the papers. His fingers brushed the embossed seal on the corner, ancient symbols, Sanskrit, and a few lines of Latin. He recognized it instantly. The words weren't business terms at all, they were clauses of deception cleverly hidden in ceremonial language. He looked back up at Landon and said quietly, "You want it by morning, sir." Landon leaned in, amused. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Translate this before my coffee turns cold, and I'll give you a promotion. Hell, maybe I'll marry you myself." The entourage roared with laughter. But Ravi only smiled. "Careful what you promise, sir. Words have power." Landon froze for a beat, unsure whether the janitor was joking or serious. The man's eyes had a calm intensity that unnerved him for a second. But pride quickly reasserted itself. He waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, save your proverbs for a poetry night. Now get back to your mop. The elevator doors opened, swallowing the group. Their laughter echoed long after they were gone. Ravi stood still, holding the folder. He could smell the faint ink of expensive paper. For a moment, the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Then he whispered under his breath, "People forget that even marble cracks under pressure." He tucked the folder under his arm and finished his work in silence. Each stroke of the mop was steady, deliberate, like a man preparing for a duel he didn't ask for but couldn't walk away from. At the reception desk, Grace, the secretary, leaned forward. "Ravi, what did Mr. Pierce hand you?" "Homework," he said with a faint smile. Grace frowned. "Be careful. You know how he is. Don't give him a reason to." He nodded. He already did. When he stepped out of the building, the cold wind hit his face. Streetlights reflected on puddles as taxis rushed past. He walked the 10 blocks to his apartment, a small, aging studio filled with books. Shelves lined with dictionaries, grammar guides, and old manuscripts. He pulled the chain on a single bulb, casting yellow light across the room. He sat at his desk, unfolded the document, and began to read. As his eyes traced each line, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. Hidden beneath the ceremonial greetings and diplomatic flattery were legal traps, phrases that would have signed away a portion of Pierce Global's assets to a fraudulent overseas shell company. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So that's your game, Mr. Pierce," he murmured. "A test you didn't know you failed before it began." He turned on his old laptop and began typing, translating each passage, annotating every deceitful clause. His fingers moved with the precision of a craftsman. Midnight came. Then 2. Then 4. When dawn light began filtering through the blinds, Ravi closed the final page of the translation and read it aloud softly. "To the man who mocked the meaning of words, here is their power." He smiled faintly, tired but satisfied. The city was waking up again. In a few hours, he would return to the same marble floor, mop in hand, but this time carrying a truth heavy enough to shift an empire. As he packed the papers neatly into a folder, he whispered, "Let's see who's cleaning up whose mess now." The camera would fade out there, the janitor walking down the hall once more, invisible to the powerful, holding the very key to their downfall in his calloused hands. The story had begun not with anger or revenge, but with a challenge born of arrogance, and a man humble enough to answer it not with pride, but precision. Tomorrow, the marble hall would shine even brighter, but for the first time, it would reflect the truth. The city outside Ravi's window pulsed with sleepless energy, neon reflections rippling through puddles, the hum of engines weaving through midnight rain. Inside his cramped apartment, time moved slower. The sound of the ticking wall clock was louder than the street. It was just Ravi, the ancient document, and a pot of overboiled tea cooling beside him. He sat in silence, glasses perched low on his nose, translating line by line. The paper was heavy, old-world ink and modern deceit wrapped into one. At first glance, it looked ceremonial, filled with pleasantries between corporations, but to a trained eye, it was something else entirely. It was a trap. Clause 14, Ravi murmured, running his finger along the ornate print, transfers 70% of operational rights, without disclosure. He exhaled slowly. Clever devils. He looked up at the wall where a faded certificate hung, Master of Linguistics, Delhi University. Next to it, a yellowed photograph of him shaking hands with a professor at Cambridge. Once upon a time, he was on a path to academia. Once upon a time, he had dreams larger than marble floors and mop handles. He rubbed his temples. "You gave me a game, Mr. Pierce," he whispered. "But you don't even know what board we're playing on." Ravi's phone buzzed, a message from Grace, the secretary who had always treated him like a human being in a building full of polished predators. "Grace, you okay? Heard about what happened. Don't take it too hard. He mocks everyone." "Ravi, I'm fine. Just doing my homework." "Grace, you mean that joke he gave you?" "Ravi, a joke to him. A chance to me." He placed the phone face down and returned to work. His eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, Sanskrit, then Latin, then an obscure dialect of Pali. Someone had woven ancient phrases into modern law, using the poetry of old empires to deceive the architects of a new one. As the hours passed, the world outside blurred into stillness. Ravi's lamp flickered, shadows dancing over the cluttered desk. He wrote notes in 3 languages, cross-referencing idioms and tracing signatures like a detective tracking fingerprints. At one point, his mind drifted back years ago, the day his life split in 2. He was in a lecture hall, arguing passionately about translation as an act of truth preservation. Later that night, a call came from his landlord in New York. His visa sponsor had defaulted. His research grant collapsed. He had 2 choices: return home, or take whatever job kept him alive. He chose survival. He chose the mop. Now, fate had handed him a document, the very thing he'd once studied for love, as a weapon of justice. He leaned back and stared at the skyline through his window. "Every word they mock will be the one that saves them," he said softly. He turned back to the document. In the margins, he began writing a translation that didn't just decode the language, it exposed it. Every hidden clause, every silent theft, every manipulation of syntax designed to strip power from the unsuspecting. By 2 a.m., he had filled 20 pages. His handwriting was neat, almost surgical. Each line was a scalpel cutting through deception. His old professor's words echoed in his head. "Translation isn't about words, Ravi. It's about intention. You're not changing the language, you're revealing the soul behind it." Ravi smiled faintly. "Then let's reveal some souls tonight." A thunderstorm rolled in outside. The lights flickered again. He took a sip of his cold tea, grimaced, and laughed quietly to himself. "Even the tea's mocking me now." At 3:15 a.m., he noticed something odd, a name buried deep in the footer of the document: Pierce Holdings, subsidiary, Lexicon International, Cyprus. He frowned. "Lexicon," he whispered. "The company that went bankrupt last year. So this isn't a merger, it's a laundering route." He stood up, pacing. They were about to hand over the company to a ghost. He sat again, the realization hardening into purpose. He reached for a new page, writing a small cover note in calm, deliberate ink. To Mr. Landon Pierce, this document was not a business proposal. It was a noose disguised as a handshake. Read it carefully. You almost hung yourself. As dawn crept into the sky, he finished the final page. The translation was flawless. But what mattered wasn't its perfection, it was its truth. He placed the neatly stacked pages into the same folder Pierce had handed him with disdain. Then he cleaned the table, folded his mop uniform neatly on a chair, and sat for a long moment in silence. He imagined Landon's smirk. The laughter. The dismissive tone. "Translate this and I'll marry you." He almost chuckled. "Careful, sir," he murmured. "You just might have to keep your word." His phone buzzed again, this time, Grace calling. He picked up. "Ravi," she said, voice drowsy. "You're still awake?" "Just finishing my shift," he replied, smiling faintly. "You're not really doing it, are you?" The translation. "I am." "Why?" she asked softly. "He was humiliating you." Ravi looked at the glowing pages before him. "Because he thinks words are weapons of pride. I know they're instruments of change." Grace was quiet for a moment. "You're either a genius or insane. Maybe both." They both laughed. It was the first human sound to fill his apartment all night. When the call ended, he dressed in clean clothes, not the company uniform, but a pressed white shirt and dark trousers he hadn't worn in years. He packed the document in a brown envelope and looked around his small apartment once more. The books, the silence, the tired clock, all witnesses to a forgotten version of him. Then he turned off the light and stepped into the pale morning mist. The streets were still empty. Buses hissed, bakeries opened, and somewhere in the distance, a newspaper boy shouted headlines about markets and mergers. Ravi walked past him, clutching the folder to his chest like a sacred text. When he reached the towering glass doors of Pierce Global, the security guard blinked in surprise. "You're early, Ravi. The floor's still clean." "Not here to clean today," Ravi said softly. "Here to deliver something." The guard smiled, confused. "Promotion?" Ravi looked at the elevator button that led up to the 60th floor. "Something like that." The elevator doors closed behind him, rising slowly through layers of glass and steel. His reflection followed him upward, a janitor holding the fate of a billionaire empire in his hands. As the numbers climbed, his heartbeat steadied. This wasn't fear. It was readiness. The bed had begun as mockery. But by sunrise, it had become something else entirely, a silent duel between ignorance and intellect, between arrogance and patience. And for the first time in years, Ravi smiled like a man who finally remembered what he was born to do. "Let's see," he whispered, "if billionaires can read what they sign." The elevator chimed. 60th floor. The doors opened into the realm of glass, marble, and money. Ravi stepped out, carrying truth disguised as translation, and the storm that was about to rewrite every contract in the building. The sun had barely begun to rise over the Manhattan skyline when the lobby of Pierce Global Holdings shimmered awake, lights flickering on, coffee brewing, executives flooding in like clockwork. The marble floors gleamed, their reflections crisp and perfect. But this morning, the janitor who usually polished them wasn't there. He was 40 floors above, standing before a wall of glass overlooking the city he once dreamed of conquering. Ravi's reflection stared back at him, the same uniform, but a different posture. Calm. Steady. Silent fire behind the eyes. Behind him, the elevator chimed open. Victor, Landon Pierce's smug assistant, stepped out with a paper cup and a sneer. "Hey, janitor. Wrong floor. Toilets are 3 levels down." Ravi didn't move. "I'm here to see Mr. Pierce." Victor laughed. "You think billionaires do walk-ins now? What's next, coffee with the interns?" Ravi met his gaze evenly. "Tell him it's about the document he gave me yesterday." That made Victor pause. "You actually did it?" Ravi nodded. before his coffee turned cold. The assistant scoffed. "You're either the dumbest man in this building or the bravest. Stay put. If he yells, it's your funeral." Victor disappeared through the double doors of the executive boardroom. Inside, muffled voices argued, something about international partners, investor calls, and an upcoming deal worth billions. A few moments later, the door cracked open again. "Mr. Pierce says he'll give you 1 minute," Victor said. "Make it entertaining." Ravi entered.
The boardroom was cathedral-like, floor-to-ceiling glass, a long polished table, and 12 executives seated like priests around an altar of profit. At the head sat Landon Pierce, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, gold tie pin glinting against his shirt. His expression was already impatient. "Ah," Landon said with a cold smile, "our philosopher with the mop. I trust you're here to return my folder. Or did you come to apply for a linguistics position?" Ravi placed the brown folder gently on the table. "You might want to read it before you sign anything today, sir." Landon leaned back, amused. "Oh, so you actually tried? This should be good. Go ahead, enlighten us." He motioned toward Ravi like a ringmaster presenting a clown. The executives chuckled, sipping coffee and scrolling on their tablets. Ravi opened the folder. His translation, 20 neatly typed pages, lay beneath the original document. He began speaking calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the vast room. Clause 3. In the event of merger, ownership rights transfer to the holding subsidiary within 90 days, unless contested by majority shareholders. Clause 14. In the event of arbitration, Lexicon International retains custodial control of intellectual property until resolution. One by one, the executives stopped scrolling. The chuckles faded. Someone leaned forward. Another frowned. Landon's smirk wavered. "Wait. Say that again, Lexicon retains what?" Ravi looked up. "Custodial control, sir. Meaning if you'd signed this document, your entire company's patents, technologies, and offshore accounts would have transferred to them automatically." Silence dropped over the room like a blade. "That's ridiculous," Victor stammered. "We had our legal team vet it." Ravi interrupted softly. "They missed the Sanskrit inserts. It's disguised as ceremonial language. The text actually says, by the will of partnership, we submit all intellectual ownership to the secondary entity." He turned another page. Clause 24 uses Latin, in perpetuum sub nomine, meaning, forever under another's name. Once signed, you'd lose control indefinitely. The color drained from several faces. Landon's hand, resting on the table, tightened into a fist. "Landon, you're saying this deal was a setup?" Ravi, "Not saying, sir. Translating." Landon's breathing deepened. His jaw clenched as he looked around the table, 12 pairs of eyes now fixed on him, silently questioning how their billionaire leader nearly handed away his empire. Victor blurted out, "He's bluffing. He probably Googled." Ravi's voice cut through like a scalpel. Page 7, line 4. Sanskrit phrase, "Dattam Vyavara Satyam Bhavti." Translation, the transaction becomes truth upon spoken consent. You verbally agreed to it last week in a recorded meeting, sir. That alone could have activated the contract. A shudder of disbelief swept across the boardroom. One executive whispered, "Good God." Another muttered, "This could have been catastrophic." Landon's eyes flicked up to Ravi. "How do you know all this?" Ravi held his gaze. "Because I studied the languages you think no one understands anymore. Words don't disappear, sir. They wait to be misused." A long silence. Then, to everyone's shock, Landon laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed through the glass room. "You're telling me," he said, standing, "that a janitor just saved my company?" Ravi said nothing. Landon's laughter grew louder, more hysterical, until it suddenly stopped. He slammed the document shut and looked at his board. "Cancel every meeting. Get the lawyers in here. And someone verify this man's translation, now." Executives scrambled. Phones rang. Papers shuffled. Chaos filled the air. Amid it all, Ravi stood calmly, hands folded behind his back. After several tense minutes, a senior legal advisor entered with wide eyes. "He's right," she said. "Every word of it. If we'd signed, we would have lost everything." The room fell silent again. Every executive turned toward Ravi, the man they'd laughed at yesterday, now the only reason they still had jobs. Landon Pierce stared at him for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, pride curdling into disbelief, disbelief into reluctant respect. "Who are you, really?" he asked quietly. Ravi smiled faintly. "Someone who understands the cost of words." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "You could have let us fall." "I could have," Ravi said. "But even janitors don't like cleaning up billion-dollar messes." A ripple of restrained laughter passed through the room, not mocking this time, but stunned. Landon exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You're not what I expected." "I rarely am," Ravi replied. Victor, still flustered, whispered, "Should I, offer him something? Money?" Landon ignored him. "You'll stay here," he told Ravi. "I'm not done with you yet." Ravi bowed his head slightly. "As you wish, sir." When he turned to leave, one of the executives, a woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet intelligence, whispered to another, "He just outsmarted a room full of Harvard MBAs." As Ravi stepped into the hallway, the morning sunlight burst through the tall windows, washing over him. Below, the marble floors gleamed like mirrors, the same ones he used to polish before dawn. He looked down, almost smiling. "Maybe they're finally clean," he murmured. In the boardroom behind him, chaos continued, Landon barking orders, lawyers scrambling, phones lighting up. But the man they'd once mocked had already walked away, leaving truth echoing in every corner. For the first time in years, Ravi felt something rise in his chest that wasn't exhaustion or resentment, it was quiet triumph. As he entered the elevator, he caught his own reflection in the polished metal doors. The same hands that once held a mop now held the fate of an empire. And as the doors slid shut, he whispered to himself with a smile. "The bet's over, Mr. Pierce. And I think I just won." The morning headlines hit the financial world like a thunderclap. Janitor exposes $1.2 billion corporate scam at Pierce Global. Language saved a fortune, meet the unsung hero behind the translation. Within hours, Ravi's face, half-shadowed, captured by a reporter's phone, was everywhere. Twitter exploded. Talk shows speculated. Some called him a whistleblower, others a fluke genius. But the truth was quieter than the noise. Inside the skyscraper that once made him invisible, chaos and awe intertwined. Landon Pierce's boardroom, normally a sanctuary of arrogance, had turned into a crisis command center. Lawyers whispered. PR managers drafted apologies. And in the corner, the janitor sat calmly, sipping the coffee someone had awkwardly offered him. He didn't want it. He didn't want any of this. But the storm had chosen him anyway. "Mr. Pierce wants to see you," Victor said stiffly, appearing at the door. Gone was the sneer, the superiority. His voice held something else now, uneasy respect, or maybe fear. Ravi stood, straightened his worn uniform, and followed him down the long glass hallway. The air smelled of expensive panic. When they entered, Landon was pacing before the city view, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, tell the press the deal was under review before we caught it." "No, don't mention the janitor." He paused, turning sharply as he realized Ravi had entered. "Never mind. Call me back." He hung up and studied the man standing before him. "You realize," Landon began slowly, "that you've just made me look like an idiot in front of half the Fortune 500? Ravi tilted his head. "Only half, sir. The rest probably already knew." A beat of silence. Then, to everyone's shock, Landon chuckled. It wasn't cruel this time, it was weary. Human. "Sit down," he said. Ravi obeyed, lowering himself into a leather chair that probably cost more than his year's rent. "You didn't have to do that," Landon said. "You could have kept quiet, let us sign, watched the empire burn. Why didn't you?" Ravi's voice was steady. "Because even when a floor is dirty, someone has to clean it." Landon stared at him, the words landing harder than expected. "You talk like you've got nothing left to lose." Ravi looked out the window. "That's because I already lost it once." Something in his tone made Landon pause. For the first time, he saw not a janitor but a man shaped by ruin, by choices, by quiet dignity. "Who are you, really?" Landon asked. Ravi smiled faintly. "Someone who used to believe in words more than power. Life taught me the two aren't so different." By midday, Landon called a press meeting. The company needed a story, a hero, a moral redemption arc. He invited Ravi to stand beside him. Cameras flashed as Pierce adjusted his tie and stepped up to the podium. "Yesterday," he began, "a mistake almost cost us everything. But thanks to the sharp mind of one of our own employees, that mistake became a lesson." The room buzzed. Landon continued, "Mr. Ravi here, our very own language specialist, discovered inconsistencies that saved this company from a disastrous deal. From now on, he'll be working directly with our executive compliance team." Ravi blinked. Compliance team? He hadn't agreed to anything. But before he could speak, applause erupted. Landon leaned closer, whispering through his smile. "Don't thank me yet. The wolves will come for you soon." That afternoon, the wolves arrived. In the cafeteria, a cluster of executives watched him as he ate alone. Whispered comments floated past. "Lucky guess. Probably leaked the story himself. Smart or not, he doesn't belong here." Ravi ignored them. He'd heard worse in silence for years. But it wasn't the cruelty that cut him, it was the disbelief. People could accept his labor, but not his mind. As he stood to leave, a voice called from behind. "You shouldn't take it personally." It was Elena Pierce, Landon's daughter, and head of corporate communications. Early 30s, sharp eyes softened by curiosity. She approached, holding her tablet against her chest. "They're just afraid of what you represent," she said. Ravi raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Proof that the people they step over can see farther than they do." He smiled, just a little. "You speak like someone who's been stepped over herself." Elena's laugh was brief, genuine. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to live in someone else's shadow." She sat across from him, uninvited but unbothered. "You know," she continued, "that translation didn't just save the company, it saved my father's reputation. You could have destroyed him." Ravi sipped his coffee. "Maybe I still could." She smiled again, more carefully this time. "Then why didn't you?" Because power without integrity is like a sentence without meaning, he said. It looks impressive, until you read it closely. Elena studied him for a long moment, her professional mask softening into something more human. You're not what I expected. Neither was your father, Ravi replied, standing to leave. By evening, the corporate machine had already repackaged the story. Emails went out, press kits circulated, and a new photo of Ravi appeared on the company's website, Pierce Global's multilingual analyst, a testament to diversity and diligence. Ravi stared at the headline from his small apartment that night. It felt hollow, like being thanked by the same system that laughed at you yesterday. He picked up the phone. It was Grace again. I saw the press conference, she said. They made you look like a superhero. I'm not, Ravi said quietly. Just someone who read what others ignored. She hesitated. So, what now? He glanced at the contract offer sitting on his table, triple salary, corporate badge, office on the 32nd floor. Now, he said. Now, I see if they really mean it. The next morning, Ravi walked into the building not as a janitor but as a consultant. The same guards who once nodded without seeing him now stood straighter when he passed. But he still carried the same calmness, the same humility. At his new desk, overlooking the lobby he used to mop, he placed a single framed quote from one of his old professors. When you understand all languages, you realize silence is the rarest one. As he adjusted the frame, Landon appeared at his door. You're trending in Singapore, he said dryly. Congratulations. Ravi looked up. For saving your company? No, Landon said with a faint grin. For making me look human. He tossed a folder on the desk. Another deal. This time, I want you to translate before we even start. Ravi nodded, flipping it open. Good. Let's start with truth this time. Landon hesitated at the doorway. You know, I was wrong about you. Ravi's eyes stayed on the paper. I know. When Landon left, Ravi leaned back in his chair. For the first time, the skyline didn't look unreachable. It looked readable, like a vast text waiting for translation. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself. They hired a translator. But what they really needed was a mirror. That night, the same marble floors gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Employees passed by without realizing the man who once cleaned those tiles was now writing the contracts they worked under. But somewhere deep in the building, Ravi's name had become a whisper, a legend in progress. The janitor who read what others ignored. The man who turned mockery into mastery. The translator who taught a billionaire the language of humility. And for the first time in years, Ravi allowed himself to breathe, not as a survivor, but as someone finally seen. Evening sunlight spilled through the skyscraper's windows like liquid amber, washing the city in a glow that made glass look like gold. Ravi stood by his desk, the one they had given him after the headlines had cooled. From up here, he could see the marble lobby far below, the same lobby where arrogance had once looked down on him. Now he looked down on it. But victory never tasted as sweet as people imagine. It was quiet, heavy, almost bittersweet. The hum of the office faded as the last of the employees clocked out. Only one door opened again, Elena Pierce's. Still here? She asked, stepping in with a soft smile. The fluorescent light behind her turned her outline into a warm silhouette. You've been buried in that file since morning. Ravi looked up from his papers. Words don't rest, Ms. Pierce. They just wait for someone to misuse them again. She chuckled. You know, for a janitor-turned-analyst, you talk like a philosopher who missed his train. I think I did, he said with a faint smile. It's just that life gave me a broom instead of a ticket. Elena crossed the room and placed a takeaway coffee beside him. Then maybe it's time you stop cleaning other people's messes. Ravi leaned back, studying her. There was something different in her tone, not pity, not curiosity, but admiration laced with something softer, something human. "You're your father's daughter," he said. But not his reflection. She tilted her head. "And what do you mean by that?" "You see people," Ravi said simply. "He sees positions." Elena's smile faltered for a moment. "You don't know him like I do." "I know enough," Ravi replied gently. "I know he built an empire out of fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being less than the man the world expects him to be. But fear makes poor foundations, Miss Pierce. It cracks even marble." There was silence. Outside, the sun slipped behind the skyline. The office dimmed into twilight. "You talk as if you've studied him," she said. Quietly. "I've studied language all my life," he replied. "And people speak long before they open their mouths." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You have a strange gift, Ravi. You translate words, and souls." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned the file toward her. "This is the new contract your father asked me to review. It's clean, for once. But I made a few revisions." Elena leaned closer, scanning the notes in the margins. Each was written in his meticulous handwriting, concise, thoughtful, and ethical. "You rewrote entire clauses." "I translated greed into honesty," he said. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Do you always speak like that?" "Only when people listen." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air between them hummed with quiet electricity, not the kind born of attraction alone, but of respect, of connection, of two souls recognizing the same truth. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "My father wants to offer you a full partnership." Ravi's brow furrowed. "Partnership?" She nodded. "He said you've proven your worth. You'd oversee all international communications, compliance, and..." Ravi raised a hand. "Stop." She blinked. "What's wrong?" He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what partnership means in this world, Elena? It means they buy your silence before you even speak." Her expression softened. "You don't have to see it that way. It's an opportunity." Ravi smiled sadly. "Opportunity doesn't always come dressed as freedom. Sometimes it wears a gold chain." She exhaled, frustrated. "You think too much." "I think just enough," he replied. "That's what kept me alive in a world built on the noise of men who don't think at all." Elena leaned back against the desk beside him, crossing her arms. "So what will you do? Turn it down?" Ravi didn't answer right away. He stared at the city lights flickering below. "I'll accept it, but on my terms. Not as an employee. As an equal." Her eyebrows lifted. "Equal?" "Yes. Equal in decision, equal in ethics. If I'm to help your father build his empire again, it will be with transparency, or not at all." Elena studied him for a long moment. "You're either brave or naive." He smiled faintly. "Both are just different dialects of faith." She laughed again, softly this time. "You really do make everything sound poetic." "It's the only way I know how to survive," he said. There was quiet again. The city outside pulsed like a living thing. Then Elena's tone changed, softer, personal. You know, she said, when I saw you that morning in the lobby, I thought you were angry. I thought you'd embarrass my father, ruin us all. But you didn't. You could have destroyed everything. Ravi looked at her. And what would that have proved? That I can wound a man who already hurts himself every day trying to stay powerful. Elena's eyes glistened faintly in the low light. You don't hate him. I don't have the time, he said quietly. Hate is for people who think they're still owed something. I've made peace with what I've lost. She turned fully toward him now, her voice lower. What have you lost, Ravi? He hesitated. Once, I had a family. A home. A name people respected. I left all of it chasing a dream that fell apart before I could catch it. And when it did, the world didn't stop, it just stepped over me. Elena's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said, smiling gently. The floor was cold, but it taught me to stand. They both laughed quietly, not out of amusement, but relief. That strange kind of laughter that happens when words finally find the courage to exist. After a pause, Elena spoke again. Ravi. I have a confession. He looked at her curiously. When you walked into that boardroom and started reading, I thought you were bluffing. I even told my father to have you escorted out. She smiled, embarrassed. But the way you spoke, it was like you weren't reading a document. You were reading a mirror. Ravi chuckled. Maybe that's all translation really is, showing people what they're saying without knowing it. Elena smiled. You've changed something in him, you know. In your father? Ravi said skeptically. Men like him don't change. They adapt when money tells them to. She shook her head. No. He's been quieter. He actually listened to his staff today. That's new. Ravi looked down at his hands, thinking. Maybe it's not me. Maybe he's finally hearing himself. The elevator dinged softly in the distance. It was late. The office was empty now, except for them. Elena picked up her tablet, hesitating. You know what's funny? Yesterday, my father told me something I haven't heard since I was a kid. What's that? He said, I met a man who reminded me why words matter. Ravi froze for a moment, unsure what to say. Elena looked at him, her expression sincere, her voice barely above a whisper. You did more than save his company, Ravi. You reminded him he still has a soul. By Monday morning, the city's financial district had transformed into a battlefield. Screens in cafes, taxi radios, and glowing tickers outside skyscrapers all blazed with the same story. The janitor who saved $1 billion empire. Pierce Global faces scrutiny after linguist exposes hidden fraud. Rivals call for audit, Pierce in crisis mode. The news spread like wildfire, and with it came something Landon Pierce hated more than scandal, sympathy. Inside the 60th floor boardroom, the air was electric with tension. Executives argued over who leaked the translation to the press, analysts debated whether to frame Ravi as hero or liability, and investors demanded reassurance that Pierce Global was not collapsing under its own arrogance. Landon stood at the head of the table, jaw clenched, while Ravi sat quietly at the far end, observing. He didn't belong there, at least, not according to the suits, but no one dared to ask him to leave. Elena, Landon snapped, I want every PR outlet spinning this as our discovery. We found the loophole, not the janitor. Make it sound like due diligence. Elena's voice was calm but firm. The public already knows, father. Trying to erase him now will only make you look threatened. Landon slammed his fist on the table. He's a janitor, not a prophet. Ravi finally spoke, his voice soft but cutting through the noise like glass. Yet it's the prophets you ignore who end up saving kingdoms, sir. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Landon's glare met his, but behind the fury was something else, respect, however reluctant. You think you understand the cost of this? He asked. Ravi's gaze didn't waver. I understand the cost of not learning from it. For a moment, neither moved. Then Elena broke the silence. Enough. We can't win this by hiding. We own it, publicly, transparently. Landon turned sharply to her. You want me to parade him on television? Yes, she said simply. Let him speak. Let people see we value truth, not just profits. The board murmured in protest. That's suicide. The shareholders will revolt. But Elena's tone remained calm. No, gentlemen. It's not suicide. It's evolution. Landon looked from his daughter to the quiet man at the end of the table. The same man who'd gone from cleaning his floors to cleaning his reputation. He exhaled sharply. Fine. You get your revolution, Elena. But if this backfires... She didn't let him finish. Then at least we'll fall telling the truth. That evening, the entire company gathered in the atrium for what the press dubbed the Pierce Address. Reporters packed the space, cameras flashing under the marble dome Ravi used to polish. Landon took the podium first, his usual confidence tempered by something humbler. For years, he began, Pierce Global has stood for innovation, integrity, and growth. But recently, one of our own reminded us what those words truly mean. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Ravi stepped forward beside him. The janitor in uniform had become the man in a tailored suit, still simple, still grounded, but commanding attention just by being. This man, Landon continued, showed us that true leadership listens before it speaks. And from today forward, that will be the language we do business in. He gestured toward Ravi. Mr. Ravi, the floor is yours. Ravi's palms were dry, but his heart beat steady. He took a breath, stepped to the microphone, and looked at the sea of faces, some mocking, some curious, some quietly moved. I didn't save a company, he began. I translated one. I found the truth buried beneath pages of power. And I realized something, that deception doesn't come from lies, it comes from silence. He paused. The room listened. I was invisible here once. People passed me without seeing me. But maybe that was the lesson. You can't lead people you refuse to see. You can't build legacies on floors you never walk. Cameras clicked. Elena watched from the front row, her eyes shining. This company can't go back to the way it was, Ravi continued. We can be profitable and principled. We can be powerful and humane. The world doesn't need another empire, it needs an example. When he stepped back, the applause started slow, hesitant, then grew into something fierce. Not polite. Real. Landon clapped last. For the first time, his expression wasn't guarded. It was proud. By the next day, the internet had crowned Ravi the corporate Gandhi. Hashtags trended globally, hashtag the translator, hashtag words matter, hashtag Ravi speaks. Talk shows requested interviews. Universities asked him to lecture. And somewhere in the noise, rival corporations sharpened their knives. Emails leaked accusing Ravi of plagiarism. Anonymous accounts claimed he'd falsified his degree. A fake, criminal record circulated on social media. Within hours, the company's stock dipped. In the PR office, Elena slammed her laptop shut. "They're coming for him," she said, storming into her father's office. "We can't just sit here." Landon rubbed his temples. "We expected this. Competitors don't forgive embarrassment." She glared. "Then fight back." He looked up at her. "How?" Before she could answer, Ravi appeared at the door. "You don't fight fire with fire," he said. "You fight it with light." Landon frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Ravi placed a stack of papers on the desk. A statement. Written in plain language. No corporate jargon. Just truth. "We release every internal document that proves our integrity. Let them dig, we'll give them nothing to find." Elena scanned the draft and smiled faintly. "This is brilliant." Landon raised an eyebrow. "You'd gamble our confidentiality?" "Transparency isn't a gamble, sir," Ravi said. "It's the only game you win without cheating." Landon studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Do it." Within 24 hours, Pierce Global released an unprecedented public archive, a digital vault of contracts, partnerships, and communications, proving their ethics were clean. The move sent shockwaves across Wall Street. Journalists hailed it as the first corporate cleansing in decades. The stock rebounded. And suddenly, what was meant to be a smear campaign turned into the birth of a new movement. #Clean Capitalism trended worldwide. Other companies began announcing truth audits. In a single week, Ravi had shifted an entire industry. Late one night, as the building finally fell quiet again, Ravi stood in the same boardroom where he had once been humiliated. The skyline glittered outside like a million unsent letters. Elena entered quietly, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You did it," she said softly. He smiled. "We did it." She handed him the cup and leaned against the glass beside him. "Do you realize what's happening out there? They're quoting you on television." He chuckled. "Words have wings. I just wrote them down." She turned toward him. "You've changed this place. You've changed him. My father, he listens now. He asks before he orders." Ravi looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "He's rediscovering his own language." They stood in silence for a while, sipping tea, watching the city pulse below. Elena finally spoke again, her voice softer. "You know, when I said not all proposals are business ones, I meant it." Ravi looked at her, eyes searching. "And what kind are we talking about now?" "The kind where 2 people stop translating their lives separately," she said, smiling. "And start speaking the same language." He laughed quietly, the sound warm and genuine. "That's one dialect I'd like to learn." Their hands brushed on the glass. Neither pulled away. Outside, the city burned with electric light. Inside, 2 people who had been born on opposite sides of power stood shoulder to shoulder, no hierarchy, no walls, just shared vision. The revolution wasn't in the headlines anymore. It was here, in the quiet between words, where truth met trust. And in that silence, something unspoken was finally understood. Morning sunlight spilled over the Pierce Global Tower, the city humming with new energy. It had been a week since Ravi's televised speech shook Wall Street, a week since transparency became fashionable and hypocrisy suddenly looked expensive. The man who once cleaned the floors of the empire was now its voice, steady, eloquent, unbought. But fame, like fire, has its own appetite. That morning, when Ravi entered the lobby, the front desk security guard grinned. "Sir, you might want to check the news before going upstairs." Ravi frowned. "Why?" The guard turned his tablet around, revealing a trending clip plastered across every social feed. It was a supercut, a mashup of Landon Pierce's old lobby humiliation turned viral again. The line that started it all echoed on loop. "Translate this and I'll marry you." Someone had added dramatic music, slow zooms, and bold text, "He did. Now will Pierce keep his promise?" Beneath the video, a hashtag raged across the internet. Hashtag the marriage challenge. Ravi blinked, stunned. "You're kidding." The guard laughed. "No, sir. They're saying it's poetic justice. The billionaire mocked a janitor, and now the world's holding him to his word." By the time Ravi reached the 60th floor, chaos had already arrived. Reporters camped outside. Phones rang non-stop. PR officers ran down hallways like soldiers during an air raid. Elena met him at the elevator, holding her tablet tightly. "You saw it?" "I did," Ravi said. "And I'm guessing your father hasn't taken it well." She exhaled. "He's threatening to sue the internet." "That's like threatening the tide," Ravi replied dryly. She smiled despite herself. "The board's panicking. Investors think the whole thing's a circus. They're saying we've become a meme, not a company." Ravi chuckled. "That's between you and the headlines, sir." The press conference took place 2 days later. Reporters flooded the marble atrium where the story began. Screens flashed hashtag the marriage challenge in bold blue letters. Landon stood at the podium beside Ravi and Elena, the irony thick enough to taste. He began with a smirk that surprised everyone. "A few months ago, I made a foolish promise, a joke that the internet has kindly resurrected." The crowd laughed. He continued, "I said, translate this and I'll marry you." Well, he did translate it, and in the process, he saved us all. He turned toward Ravi, who met his gaze with quiet warmth. "So, no," Landon said, smiling, "I'm not marrying him, though at this point, he might be the best man I know." The hall erupted in laughter and applause. Cameras flashed. Ravi stepped forward, taking the microphone. What began as mockery ended as mentorship. "We often joke about others' worth until they remind us of our own." Then, with a glint of mischief, he added, "But to be clear, I only translate contracts, not proposals." Laughter swept the room. Elena shook her head, smiling, but her eyes softened when she caught Ravi's glance. By evening, every news outlet carried the headline. "Billionaire's redemption speech wins the internet." From joke to justice, the hashtag marriage challenge ends in grace. But not everything was laughter and applause. Behind closed doors, rival companies plotted new attacks. Anonymous leaks resurfaced, this time targeting Elena, accusing her of orchestrating the entire media storm for personal gain. The smear campaign hit hard. Online trolls twisted the story, painting her as manipulative, ambitious, heartless. When Ravi found her in her office that night, she was staring blankly at the glowing screen, silent. "They're saying I used you," she said quietly. "That I turned my father's mistake into a romance strategy." Ravi set down 2 cups of tea, just as she once had for him. "Let them talk," he said. "Truth doesn't need to argue, it just waits." Her eyes glistened. You don't understand. In my world, reputation is currency. And I just got robbed. He sat beside her. Then let me remind them who you are. She looked up. How? Ravi opened his laptop. With words. That night, he drafted an open letter for publication, not as a statement from Pierce Global, but as one from himself. I was a janitor when I met Elena Pierce. She didn't mock me. She saw me. When I stood in her father's boardroom, she was the only one who listened before laughing. The world calls her ambitious. I call her honest. If that's ambition, may we all have a little more of it. He signed it simply, Ravi. By dawn, the letter went viral. The smear evaporated. The internet, fickle but forgiving, changed its tune. The translator defends the heiress, modern chivalry in a digital world. Elena read it with trembling hands. When she found Ravi later that morning, she didn't speak, she just hugged him, wordless and real. Days later, during a charity gala hosted in the same building, a reporter joked into her mic, "So, Mr. Ravi, are you finally accepting the #marriage challenge?" Ravi smiled, his eyes finding Elena across the room, radiant under the chandeliers. Maybe I already did, he said softly. Just not in the way they expected. The crowd laughed, but Elena understood. Their eyes met, two languages, perfectly translated. And somewhere in the crowd, Landon Pierce watched quietly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Because in a strange, poetic twist of fate, his careless joke had become prophecy, not of marriage, but of connection. Not a bond of wealth, but of worth. The janitor had become the company's conscience. The heiress had become its heart. And together, they were rewriting what legacy meant, one word, one truth, one translation at a time. The winter morning was pale and golden, the kind of light that made even the tallest skyscrapers seem humbled. From the top floor of Pierce Global, the city stretched outward like a living manuscript, each street a line, each building a word. And standing before that skyline, side by side, were two people rewriting its language. Ravi adjusted his tie, the same modest navy one he had worn for every major turning point since the day he'd walked into this building with a mop in hand. Elena, dressed in a sleek ivory suit, stood beside him, reviewing the notes for the press conference that would change everything. "It's strange," she said quietly, her reflection mingling with his in the window. "This is the same office where I once watched my father crush people for being honest." "And now," Ravi replied softly, "it's where we're about to teach the world that honesty pays dividends." She smiled. "You still sound like a poet." He smiled back. "And you still sound like the person who made me believe poetry could build empires." The day's event had been planned for months, though event wasn't the right word anymore. It was a transformation, a metamorphosis. The company that once represented profit over principle was about to unveil the Lingua Foundation, a billion-dollar humanitarian initiative aimed at global literacy, translation access, and ethics in AI communication. Pierce Global was no longer merely a tech conglomerate, it was becoming the world's first language-driven social enterprise, and at its heart stood Ravi, the janitor who had cleaned his way into history. Landon Pierce watched from his office as the preparations filled the atrium below. He had aged in the past months, not in years, but in humility. For the first time in decades, the man who once measured success in dollars now measured it in decency. When Ravi entered, Landon turned, offering a slow nod. "I read your final proposal. And it's impossible," Landon said. "But that's exactly why we should do it." Ravi smiled faintly. Then we agree. Landon chuckled. You know, there was a time I'd have fired you just for saying that. I know, Ravi said, his tone gentle. But then I wouldn't have met your daughter. Landon gave him a long, searching look, the kind fathers give the men they're learning to trust. She makes you better. And she makes this place human, Ravi replied. They shook hands. This time, not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and janitor, but as two men who had learned to respect each other in the language that mattered most, truth. Downstairs, the world had gathered. Reporters from every major outlet, investors, NGO leaders, linguists, teachers, and activists, all curious to see what the billion-dollar vow meant. The air buzzed with anticipation as Elena took the stage first. Cameras flashed, applause rolled like thunder. Good morning, she began, her voice steady but warm. You've all heard the stories. About arrogance. About redemption. About a joke that became a revolution. The crowd chuckled softly. But this isn't about a joke anymore, she continued. It's about responsibility, and what happens when power finally learns to speak the language of compassion. She turned slightly, gesturing toward Ravi, who stepped into the spotlight to a standing ovation. Ravi paused, taking in the moment. The same hall where laughter once humiliated him now celebrated him. He looked across the sea of faces, some curious, some reverent, some teary, and began. When I first walked into this building, I was invisible. I cleaned floors that reflected everyone but me. But life has a strange sense of humor, it lets you polish the world long enough until one day, it finally sees you. The audience leaned in. When I translated that contract months ago, I thought I was saving a company. But I was wrong. I was translating a culture, one that had forgotten how to listen. He looked over at Elena, then at Landon sitting in the front row. Today, we make a vow, not to each other, but to the world. Pierce Global will no longer speak the language of greed. We'll speak the language of growth through goodness. We'll use every resource we have not just to expand markets, but to expand understanding. He paused as the applause swelled again. The Lingua Foundation will translate textbooks into every major world language, build AI that understands, not replaces, human nuance, and support education in the places where words are still a privilege. We'll make sure no voice gets lost in translation again. Cameras clicked, pens raced, and somewhere in the front row, a child from a literacy charity held a handmade sign that read, "Words changed the world." Ravi smiled. Yes, he said softly into the mic, words did. After the ceremony, when the crowd dispersed and the cameras stopped flashing, Ravi and Elena walked onto the terrace overlooking the city. The evening sun painted the skyline in molten gold. The air was cool, the moment serene. You know, Elena said quietly, you never actually answered the question everyone's still asking. Ravi raised an eyebrow. Which one? The #marriage challenge. He laughed softly. Ah, that one. Well, she pressed. Ravi turned toward her, his expression tender. I think we already fulfilled it. The marriage wasn't between two people, it was between ethics and enterprise. Between integrity and influence. She smiled. That's a very Ravi answer. He looked at her, voice dropping to something more intimate. But if you mean the other kind. She met his gaze. I do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, not gold, not diamond, but silver, engraved with the Sanskrit word satya, truth. Elena Pierce, he said quietly, the words trembling not with fear but gratitude, you help me turn language into legacy. Will you keep building it with me? For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause, the wind, the city, the noise. Then she smiled, eyes shining. You just proposed with a translation. It's the only language I know, he said. She laughed softly through tears. Then yes, Mr. Translator. I'll build it with you. The following week, the headlines glowed brighter than ever before. Pierce Global commits $1 billion to Global Literacy Initiative. From janitor to visionary, Ravi and Elena's foundation redefines corporate ethics. A new era for business, humanity is back in the boardroom. Inside the headquarters, a new plaque was installed beside the main entrance. It bore an inscription Ravi himself had written in English, Sanskrit, and Latin. Power speaks loudly. But truth, when spoken clearly, lasts forever. And beneath it, a smaller engraving. Dedicated to those who were never meant to be heard, but spoke anyway. Months later, during the Foundation's first field mission in Nairobi, a child handed Ravi a handwritten note in Swahili. Elena translated it aloud. Thank you for giving words to those who had only silence. Ravi looked out across the classroom, children laughing, learning, dreaming in languages once dismissed as minor. He felt something inside him settle, not as pride but peace. He turned to Elena, smiling. This is what a billion-dollar vow looks like. She nodded, eyes glistening. No marble, no contracts. Just meaning. He took her hand as the children's laughter filled the air. And for the first time, Ravi didn't feel like a janitor or a savior or a headline. He felt like what he had always been, a translator. Not just of words, but of worlds. Final line. Because when power learns to speak the language of humility, the world finally begins to listen.